He offered her a flower. The alien woman thought it was a proposal. The gift of misunderstanding. The atmosphere processors hummed softly as Dr. Ethan Cross knelt beside the silvery stream, his breath catching at the sight before him. There, nestled between iridescent rocks, bloomed a flower he'd only seen in ancient Valoran texts, the twilight iris, its petals shifting from deep violet to luminous gold with each passing second. His hands trembled as he carefully extracted it, roots and all, preserving it in a bio-containment field. 3 months on this alien world and he'd finally found it. The discovery would revolutionize his understanding of cross-planetary botanical evolution. But more than scientific triumph, he felt gratitude. His mind drifted to Lyrae, the Valoran woman who'd saved him from a rockslide 2 weeks ago. Without her knowledge of the terrain, he'd have died in those mountains. She'd visited his research camp several times since, teaching him about edible plants, dangerous fauna, and the subtle language of Valora's forests. Her presence had become the highlight of his days. The way her violet skin seemed to glow in Valora's amber sunlight. How her silver eyes sparkled when she laughed at his clumsy pronunciation of Valoran words. The attraction had crept up on him, unexpected and undeniable. By the time Ethan returned to camp, the twin suns were setting, painting the sky in ribbons of crimson and gold. He found Lyrae near the perimeter, examining a specimen he'd tagged earlier. Her dark hair, threaded with bioluminescent strands that her people cultivated naturally, caught the fading light. "Lyrae," he called, suddenly nervous. "I found something today. Something rare." She turned and his heart did that peculiar flip it had started doing recently. Her features were humanoid enough to read. High cheekbones, full lips and elegant nose, but distinctly Valoran, with that ethereal quality that made her seem like she'd stepped from a dream. "Show me," she said, her voice carrying that melodic accent that made even simple words sound like music. Ethan deactivated the containment field, and the twilight iris unfurled completely, its petals beginning their color dance in the open air. The flower pulsed with soft light, casting purple and gold shadows across both their faces. "It's beautiful," he said quietly. "Like you. I wanted you to have it. As thanks for everything." He held it out to her, the flower's glow reflecting in his hopeful eyes. Lyrae's expression transformed. Her silver eyes widened, then began to shimmer with moisture. Her hand flew to her mouth, and for a moment she simply stared. Then slowly, reverently, she accepted the flower with both hands, cradling it as if it were made of starlight itself. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice breaking. Do you know what this means?" He smiled, charmed by her emotional reaction. "That I'm grateful? That I think you deserve something as special as you've asked me to bind my life to yours?" Her words were barely audible. "Forever. This is the eternal bloom. In my culture, offering a living twilight iris is—" She looked up at him, tears now trailing down her purple cheeks, catching the flower's light. "It's a proposal of life bonding, the deepest vow our people can make." Ethan's smile froze. "What?" But before he could process this revelation, voices erupted from the nearby Valoran settlement. Within moments, figures began emerging from between the trees. Lyrae's people, drawn by some invisible signal. They approached with expressions of joy and wonder, calling out in Valoran, their bioluminescent hair glowing brighter with excitement. An elderly woman, her skin a deeper shade of purple with age, reached them first. She looked at the flower in Lyrae's hands, then at Ethan, and smiled with profound warmth. "The off-worlder has chosen our Lyrae," she announced in accented English. "The bonding ceremony must begin preparations immediately. This is a blessed day." Ethan stood frozen as the Valorans surrounded them, touching Lyrae's shoulders in congratulation, bowing respectfully to him. His colleague, Dr. Sarah Chen, appeared from the research tent, her expression shifting from confusion to alarm as she took in the scene. Lyrae met his eyes across the growing crowd, the twilight iris still glowing in her hands, her expression a mixture of overwhelming emotion and dawning fear that perhaps he hadn't meant what his gesture implied. And Ethan realized his simple act of gratitude had just changed everything. Between two hearts, Sarah pulled Ethan aside the moment the Valorans dispersed to begin preparations, her grip on his arm urgent. The research tent felt suffocating as she paced, running her hands through her short black hair. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Sarah's voice was a harsh whisper. I've been studying Valoran culture for 2 years. The Twilight Iris bond is sacred, Ethan. It's not like human marriage, it's supposed to be eternal. Binding not just in life, but in their spiritual afterlife. You can't just back out. Ethan sank onto a supply crate, the weight of his mistake crushing down on him. I was just trying to thank her. The flower was beautiful, she's been kind, I thought. You thought like a human on Earth giving someone roses, Sarah interrupted. But we're not on Earth. Every culture has its symbols, and you just triggered theirs without knowing the language. Through the tense, transparent panel, Ethan could see Lyre in the distance, surrounded by Valoran women. Even from here, he could see how she held herself, stiffly, as if afraid to move, the flower still cradled protectively in her hands. She looked up suddenly, and their eyes met across the space. Something electric passed between them, something he couldn't name but felt in his chest like a physical pull. What if... He started, then stopped. What if what? Sarah asked, her tone softening slightly. What if I don't want to back out? Sarah stared at him. Ethan, you've known her for 2 weeks. 3, he corrected quietly. And I know how this sounds, Sarah. I know it's fast and complicated and probably insane. But when I'm with her, I feel more alive than I've felt in years. She makes me laugh, she challenges me, she sees the universe in ways I never imagined. Today when I found that flower, she was the only person I wanted to share it with. That's not love, Sarah said gently. That's infatuation mixed with xenophilic curiosity and isolation. Don't. Ethan stood, his voice firm. Don't reduce what I feel to clinical terms. I'm a scientist too, remember? I know how to differentiate data from reality. Before Sarah could respond, a young Valoran male entered, bowing respectfully. Dr. Cross? Elder Shanae requests your presence. There are traditions to discuss. The next hours became a blur of cultural immersion. Elder Shanae explained the bonding ceremony with patient detail, the exchange of life vows, the intertwining of bioluminescent strands from each partner's hair, the planting of the twilight iris in a shared garden that would bloom for centuries. She showed him the ceremonial markings he would wear, temporary luminescent patterns painted on skin that would glow during the 3-day celebration. And Lyre? Ethan finally asked. Does she want this? Shanae's ancient eyes studied him with unnerving perception. Lyre's heart has been walking beside yours since the day she pulled you from the stones. But hearts and traditions do not always speak the same language, young one. She fears you offered the bloom without understanding that your heart was only being kind. Where is she now? In the reflection grove. It is tradition for the bond chosen to spend time in solitude before the ceremony, contemplating the weight of forever. Shanae paused. Though perhaps your traditions are different. Perhaps you should go to her. Ethan found Lyre sitting on a luminescent moss bed beneath towering trees whose leaves glowed soft blue in the gathering darkness. The twilight iris rested in a small pool of water beside her, still pulsing with light. She didn't look up when he approached, though he knew she'd heard him. I talked to Elder Shanae, he said quietly, sitting a respectful distance away. She explained everything. Then you understand the mistake. Lyre's voice was carefully neutral, but he could hear the tremor beneath. You offered something precious without knowing its meaning. There's no shame in that. We can tell my people it was a cultural misunderstanding. They'll be disappointed, but they'll accept. What if it wasn't a mistake? Now she looked at him, her silver eyes wide in the darkness. Ethan, I'm not saying I knew what the flower meant, he continued, leaning closer. But I knew I wanted to give you something that matched how you make me feel. Something rare and beautiful and precious. If that flower represents a bond, then maybe some part of me already knew what I was offering. You've been here 3 months, Lyre whispered. I'm an alien to you. You don't know me, not really. How I sleep, what angers me, what breaks my heart. Then let me learn. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. Her skin was warm, her fingers slightly longer than human proportions, and touching her sent electricity up his arm. Lyre, I don't believe in destiny or fate or whatever the universe supposedly plans. I'm a scientist, but I believe in what I feel, and I feel something with you that I've never felt before. Your people will say you're compromised, she said, but her fingers tightened around his. That you've gone native, that you've let xenophilia cloud your judgment. Let them say it. He shifted closer until their knees touched. You saved my life. You've shown me wonders I'd only dreamed of, You laugh at my terrible jokes and correct my worse Valoran pronunciation, and when I see you, Lyrae, I see home. Maybe that's crazy after 3 weeks. But maybe crazy is what happens when two people from different worlds recognize something in each other that transcends all the logical reasons why it shouldn't work. A tear traced down her purple cheek, catching starlight. In my culture, a bond is forever. There's no dissolving it, no separation. If you choose this, you're choosing all of it. My world, my people, my life intertwined with yours until our last breaths and beyond. I know, Ethan said. Shanae made that very clear. And you still want this? You still want me? Instead of answering with words, Ethan cupped her face gently with his free hand, his thumb brushing away her tear. He leaned in slowly, watching her eyes for any sign of hesitation. Finding none, he closed the final distance and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, two beings learning each other's language through touch. Then Lyrae made a small sound in her throat and kissed him back with sudden intensity, her hand coming up to tangle in his hair. She tasted of something sweet and unfamiliar, and when she pulled him closer, Ethan felt like he was falling into starlight itself. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Lyrae rested her forehead against his. Her bioluminescent hair had begun to glow brighter, responding to her emotions, casting them both in soft silver light. The ceremony is in 5 days, she whispered against his lips. Then I have 5 days to prove I'm sure, Ethan replied, stealing another quick kiss that made her laugh, a sound like wind chimes that he already knew he wanted to hear for the rest of his life. But even as they sat together in the reflection grove, hands intertwined and hearts opening, neither noticed Sarah in the distance, speaking urgently into her communication device, nor did they see the response message that flickered across her screen. Research team extraction approved. Dr. Cross returns to Earth in 6 days. No exceptions. Ethan stood frozen as the Valorans surrounded them, touching Lyrae's shoulders in congratulation, bowing respectfully to him. His colleague, Dr. Sarah Chen, appeared from the research tent, her expression shifting from confusion to alarm as she took in the scene. Lyrae met his eyes across the growing crowd, the twilight iris still glowing in her hands, her expression a mixture of overwhelming emotion and dawning fear that perhaps he hadn't meant what his gesture implied. And Ethan realized his simple act of gratitude had just changed everything. So, the weight of tradition, the next 3 days were a dream Ethan never wanted to wake from. Lyrae took him deeper into Valora's forests than any human had ventured, showing him bioluminescent waterfalls that sang in harmonics when the wind blew through crystalline rocks, meadows where the grass responded to footsteps by blooming instant flowers, caves filled with floating luminescent creatures that danced to the rhythm of heartbeats. They talked for hours about his childhood in Seattle, her youth learning the forest ways from her mother, his failed engagement on Earth, her fear that she'd never find a partner who understood her love of silence as much as conversation. On my world, Ethan said as they sat beside a stream that ran silver instead of blue, we have this idea of soulmates, one perfect person meant for you. I never believed in it before. Lyrae leaned against his shoulder, a gesture that had become natural between them. We have something similar. We call it Hinara, the heart mirror, someone who reflects your truest self back to you. She paused. I see myself differently in your eyes, Ethan. I see someone braver than I thought I was. He kissed the top of her head, breathing in her scent, like rain and something floral he couldn't name. You're the bravest person I know. You pulled a stranger from falling rocks without hesitation. That wasn't bravery. That was instinct. She pulled back to look at him, her purple skin glowing in the silver stream's reflection. But choosing to believe your feelings are real when my mind says it's too fast, too impossible, that terrifies me. Then be terrified with me, Ethan said, taking both her hands. Be terrified and choose it anyway. But that evening, reality fractured their bubble. Ethan returned to camp to find his belongings being packed by research assistants he barely knew. Sarah stood in the center of the chaos, her expression apologetic but firm. What's happening? Ethan demanded. The board reviewed your situation, Sarah said quietly. They've ordered your immediate return to Earth. You're emotionally compromised, Ethan. Your judgment regarding the Valoran culture is now considered unreliable. They're sending a replacement. They can't do that. They can, and they have. The transport arrives tomorrow evening. I'm sorry, but this is bigger than personal feelings. You're a representative of Earth's xenobotanical division. Your actions affect how the Velerans perceive all humans. Ethan felt the world tilting. I'm not leaving. The ceremony is in 2 days, which is exactly why you need to leave now, Sarah interrupted. Before it goes too far, before you make promises you can't keep. What happens in 5 years when you miss Earth? When the novelty wears off? When you realize you've bound yourself to an alien world for eternity because of a 3-week infatuation? It's not infatuation. Then prove it. Sarah's voice rose. Go home. If what you feel is real, it'll survive distance. Come back when you're certain, when you've had time to think without Valora's moons and bioluminescent forests clouding everything. Ethan opened his mouth to argue, but movement in the doorway stopped him. Lyrae stood there, her face carefully blank, but he could see the devastation in her silver eyes. She'd heard everything. Lyrae, he started. She's right, Lyrae said, her voice hollow. You should go home. No, I'm not going anywhere. Your people need you. Your world needs you. She stepped back as he moved toward her. I was foolish to believe this could work. You have a whole planet calling you back. I have roots here I can never leave. We were living in a beautiful dream, but dreams end, Ethan. This isn't a dream, he insisted, finally reaching her and grasping her arms gently. This is real. What I feel is real, is it? Her voice broke. Or did I just happen to be the first Valoran who showed you kindness? Would you feel the same if I had different colored skin, if I came from a different village, if— Stop. He cupped her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. I would cross galaxies for you, Lyrae. I would learn 1,000 languages, adapt to 1,000 customs. Not because you're Velaran, but because you're you. Because when I'm with you, I'm more myself than I've ever been. Tears streamed down her purple cheeks. Then why does leaving feel inevitable? Why does it feel like you were always meant to be temporary? Because you're scared, he said softly. And so am I. But being scared doesn't mean we're wrong. Lyrae pulled away from his touch, wrapping her arms around herself. The bioluminescent strands in her hair had dimmed to almost nothing, reflecting her emotional state. Maybe fear is wisdom. Maybe I should have stayed away from the beginning, should have known better than to let myself care for someone who belongs to the stars. I don't belong to the stars, Ethan said desperately. I belong here. With you, do you? She looked at him with ancient sadness. Or do you just hate the idea of disappointing me? Of being the human who broke a Velaran girl's heart? Maybe you're staying because you feel obligated, because you made an accidental promise you're too honorable to break. That's not fair. None of this is fair. Lyrae's voice finally cracked completely. I didn't ask to fall in love with you. I didn't ask for you to offer me forever and then have your world yank you away. I didn't ask for my heart to feel like it's being torn in two. The words hung in the air between them. I didn't ask to fall in love with you. It was the first time either of them had said the word aloud. Ethan felt something break and rebuild simultaneously in his chest. Say that again. Say what? Lyrae whispered. The part about loving me. She closed her eyes, fresh tears escaping. It doesn't matter. Love isn't enough when worlds pull us apart. It's everything, Ethan said fiercely. He crossed to her in 2 strides and pulled her against him, one hand tangling in her hair, the other pressing her close. Love is everything, Lyrae, and I love you too. I love your laugh and your strength and the way you see magic in things I'd catalog as mere data. I love how you've made me question everything I thought I knew about connection and belonging. And I'm not getting on that transport. Ethan. He silenced her with a kiss, pouring every ounce of certainty he possessed into the connection. Lyrae resisted for half a second, then melted against him, her fingers gripping his shirt as if he were her anchor in a storm. The kiss deepened, desperate and claiming, and when they finally broke apart, both were trembling. Run away with me. Ethan breathed against her lips. Tonight. There are places in these forests where no one will find us. We'll miss the transport, miss the ceremony, miss everything except each other, and we'll figure out the rest later. That's madness, Lyrae said, but she was smiling through her tears. Then let's be mad together. He kissed her again, softer this time. Let's be mad and reckless and so incredibly, impossibly in love that logic doesn't stand a chance. For a moment, Lyrae looked like she might agree. Her hands came up to frame his face, her thumb tracing his cheekbone with infinite tenderness. Then her expression shifted and she stepped back, shaking her head. No, she whispered. I won't let you throw away your life for me. I won't be the reason you lose your career. You're standing with your people. If you stay, it needs to be because you've chosen it with full knowledge and time, not because you're running from a decision. Lyrae, please, go, she said, her voice stronger now despite the tears. Get on that transport tomorrow. Go back to your world. And if you still feel this way in 6 months, if you still want me after you've remembered what Earth feels like, what your real life looks like without Valora's moons and magic. She took a shuddering breath. Then come back. Come back and bind your life to mine knowing exactly what you're choosing. I already know what I'm choosing, Ethan said, but she was already walking away, her bioluminescent hair flickering like a dying star. He stood alone in the research camp, surrounded by half-packed equipment and the weight of impossible choices, and for the first time since arriving on Valora, Ethan Cross felt truly lost. When worlds collide, Ethan didn't sleep that night. He sat in the observation dome of the research station, watching Valora's twin moons arc across the violet sky, their light painting silver patterns on the forest canopy below. Every logical part of his brain told him Lyrae was right, that leaving would give him clarity, perspective, proof that what he felt wasn't just the intoxication of an alien world, but his heart knew differently. By dawn, he'd made his decision. He found Sarah reviewing data logs, her expression weary from her own sleepless night. I'm not leaving, he said simply. Sarah looked up, unsurprised. Ethan, I know what you're going to say, that I'm throwing away my career, that I'm letting emotion override reason, that I'll regret this. Maybe you're right about all of it. He sat across from her, his voice steady, but I'll regret losing her more. I'll regret spending the rest of my life wondering what could have been if I'd just been brave enough to stay. The board will blacklist you, Sarah warned. You'll never work in xenobotany again. Then I'll find other work. Valora needs people who understand both human and Valoran perspectives. I can build something here, a cultural exchange program, a joint research initiative, something that matters. He met her eyes. I didn't come to the stars to play it safe, Sarah. I came to discover something extraordinary. And I did. I just didn't expect it to have silver eyes and make my heart feel like it could hold the universe. Sarah studied him for a long moment, then sighed. You're an idiot, probably, and you're genuinely in love with her. Completely. A smile tugged at Sarah's lips despite herself. Then go tell her before she does something stupid like noble sacrifice. You scientists are all dramatic when you're in love. She pulled up a communication screen. I'll handle the board. Tell them you've gone native for legitimate research purposes, long-term cultural immersion study. It'll buy you time. Sarah, go. She waved him away. And Ethan? If you hurt her, I'll personally file a report so scathing they'll ban you from every planet in the Alliance. Ethan was halfway to the forest when he saw smoke rising from the direction of the Valoran village. Not the normal cooking fires, but thick, dark smoke that spoke of destruction. His heart seized. He ran. The scene that greeted him was chaos. Several structures at the village's edge were burning, and Velorans rushed with water vessels trying to contain the flames. But Ethan's trained eye immediately identified the cause. A crashed human survey drone. Its hull split open. Fuel cells leaking accelerant into the wooden structures. What happened? He demanded, finding Elder Shanae directing the firefighting efforts. Your sky machine fell from the clouds, she said, her ancient face grim. No one was hurt but the bonding grove. She gestured and Ethan's stomach dropped. The sacred grove where the ceremony was to take place was engulfed in flames. And in the center of the destruction he could see Lyrae, her clothes singed, desperately trying to reach something in the heart of the fire. The twilight iris, Shanae whispered. She planted it in the sacred pool yesterday as preparation for the ceremony. If it burns, it's seen as an omen, that the bond was never meant to be. Ethan didn't think. He grabbed a water-soaked cloth from a nearby Valoran, wrapped it around his face, and ran into the flames. Ethan, no! Sarah's voice screamed behind him, but he was already pushing through smoke and heat. He found Lyrae collapsed near the sacred pool, the heat having overwhelmed her. The twilight iris still stood in the water, its petals beginning to char at the edges. Ethan hauled Lyrae into his arms. She was lighter than a human woman, but solid and real, and staggered back through the flames. His lungs burned, his exposed skin blistered, but he didn't stop until he'd carried her clear of the grove. He laid her gently on the cool grass, and her eyes fluttered open, silver irises unfocused. The flower, she rasped. I couldn't save it. It doesn't matter, Ethan said, though his heart ached at the loss. You matter. You're what matters. The omen, Lyrae whispered, tears cutting through the soot on her face. The universe is telling us this bond is cursed. The universe is telling us that human technology needs better fail-safes, Ethan corrected, brushing her hair back from her face with trembling hands. Lyrae, listen to me. I'm not getting on that transport. I'm not leaving. Not today, not in 6 months, not ever unless you send me away yourself. Your career is just a career. You're my life. He took her hands, ignoring his own burned palms. I don't care about omens or burned flowers or what anyone thinks. I care about you. I choose you. I will always choose you. Lyrae sat up, wincing, and stared at him like she was seeing him for the first time. You ran into fire for a flower. No, he corrected softly. I ran into fire for you. The flower was just growing in the way. Despite everything, the pain, the smoke, the destroyed grove, Lyrae laughed. It was a broken sound, but genuine. You're an idiot, so I've been told. He cupped her face, mindful of his burns. But I'm your idiot if you'll have me. The ceremony grove is destroyed, Lyrae said, but her hands came up to cover his, holding them against her cheeks. The twilight iris is gone. By our traditions, we can't complete the bonding. Then we'll make new traditions, Ethan said, or we'll wait and plant a new iris. Or we'll bond in my human way and your Velaran way and every way in between. I don't care about the how, Lyrae. I only care about the who. Elder Shine approached, her expression unreadable. Behind her, the fires were finally being contained. And Velarans were gathering, watching the exchange with quiet intensity. The off-worlder speaks truth, Shine said, her voice carrying across the clearing. I see it in his eyes. He sees my Lyrae not as an alien curiosity, but as his Hanara, his heart mirror. She looked at the destroyed grove, then back at them. Perhaps the fire was not an omen of failure, but of transformation. The old ways burn so new ones can grow. She knelt and to Ethan's shock touched the scorched earth where the grove had stood. When she lifted her hand, a tiny green shoot had emerged, impossibly fast. Valora herself speaks. Where there is true love, life finds a way to bloom, Lyrae gasped, and around them, the Valorans began to murmur in wonder. But the twilight iris takes a century to grow, Lyrae protested. Then you have a century to deepen your bond before it blooms again, Shane said with a knowing smile, though I suspect the universe will be kinder than that. For now, rest, heal, and when you are ready, we will perform a ceremony that honors both your worlds. For this union is not just between two souls, but between two peoples. As Velarans dispersed to continue cleanup, Ethan helped Lyrae to her feet. She swayed against him, and he wrapped his arm around her waist, supporting her weight. You smell like smoke, she murmured against his shoulder. You smell like burned wood and stubbornness, he countered. We're both disasters. Perfect for each other. Then, he tilted her chin up, mindful of their various injuries, and kissed her gently. No more running. No more noble sacrifices. Just us figuring this out together. Deal? Deal, Lyrae whispered. Then stronger. I love you, Ethan Cross, even if you are a reckless, fire-running idiot. I love you too, Lyrae of Valora, even if you're a stubborn, flower-rescuing martyr. They stood together in the aftermath of destruction, two beings from different worlds, holding each other upright and proving that sometimes the strongest foundations are built from ashes and choice, and the courage to love without guarantees. That night, as medical staff treated their burns and Sarah handled increasingly frantic messages from Earth, Ethan and Lyrae lay side by side in the medical shelter, fingers intertwined. Through the transparent ceiling, they could see both Valora's moons and the distant blue dot that was Earth, all of them sharing the same vast sky. Are you scared? Lyrae asked quietly. Terrified, Ethan admitted. But I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Me too, she said, squeezing his hand. Me too. And somewhere in the scorched earth of the bonding grove, impossible and inexplicable, a small green shoot continued to grow, reaching toward the starlight with patient, stubborn hope. 3 months later, the bonding grove had transformed into something unprecedented, a fusion of Velaran tradition and human innovation. Where the old ceremony space had stood, a new structure emerged. living trees shaped and guided into natural archways, their branches interwoven with bioluminescent vines. At the center, the impossible green shoot had grown into a young sapling, its leaves already showing the telltale shimmer of the twilight iris, though it would be years before it bloomed. Ethan stood at the grove's entrance, wearing traditional Velaran ceremonial garments modified to suit human physiology. The fabric shimmered with bioluminescent threads that Lyrae had woven herself, spending weeks learning the ancient art from the village elders. His hands were finally healed from the fire, though faint scars remained, marks he wore with pride, proof of the day he'd chosen love over safety. Sarah adjusted his collar, her expression somewhere between exasperated and fond. "You know, when I recruited you for this mission, I expected you to bring back plant samples, not an alien fiancé." "Wife," Ethan corrected with a grin. "In about 20 minutes. The board is still furious, you know, though your proposal for the Valoran Human Cultural Exchange Center helped smooth things over." She stepped back, examining him critically. "You look good. Happy. Disgustingly, radiantly happy." "I am," he said simply. "Sarah, thank you. For everything. For not reporting me immediately. For helping me navigate the political nightmare. For being here. Well, someone has to make sure you don't accidentally propose to the entire village with an inappropriate hand gesture," she teased. Then, more seriously, "I'm glad you stayed, Ethan. Not everyone finds what you and Lyrae have. Don't waste it." Never. Music began to drift through the grove, Velaran instruments blending with human recordings Ethan had brought from Earth, creating a melody that belonged to no single world but to something new and shared. The gathered crowd, a mix of Velarans and the small human research contingent, turned toward the forest path, and then Lyrae emerged, and Ethan forgot how to breathe. She wore traditional bonding robes in deep purple that matched her skin, but they'd been embroidered with silver thread in patterns that represented both Valoran constellations and Earth's astronomical charts, their two homes mapped across fabric. Her bioluminescent hair had been woven with white earth flowers that he'd somehow managed to cultivate in Valora's soil, and it cascaded down her back in waves of light and bloom. Her silver eyes found his across the space, and the smile that lit her face could have powered stars. She walked toward him not with the measured pace of traditional ceremony, but with barely contained eagerness, nearly running the last few steps. He caught her hands and they stood facing each other, grinning like fools while Elder Shanae chuckled. "Patience, young ones," Shanae said warmly. "We have rituals to observe." The ceremony was beautiful in its hybrid nature. They exchanged vows in both English and Velaran, promising not just love but understanding, not just presence but patience for the inevitable cultural confusions ahead. When Shanae invited them to perform the traditional hair binding, Ethan offered a lock of his own hair, carefully preserved, which Lyrae wove into her bioluminescent strands. In turn, she gave him a strand of hers, which he wore braided into a bracelet that would glow softly with her essence for the rest of his life. "By Velaran law, you are heart mirrors bound in this life and the next," Shanae intoned, then with a twinkle in her ancient eyes, "and by human custom you may kiss your bride, yes?" "Yes," Ethan said, and pulled Lyrae into his arms. The kiss was different from all the ones before, charged not with desperate uncertainty, but with promise and permanence. Lyrae wrapped her arms around his neck, and he lifted her slightly off the ground, spinning her once as their gathered friends cheered in two languages. When he set her down, her bioluminescent hair was glowing so bright it cast dancing shadows across the grove. "My husband," she said, testing the human word. "My Hanara," he replied in Velaran. "My heart mirror. Forever," they said together. The celebration that followed lasted 3 days, as was Velaran custom. There was food, human dishes adapted with Valoran ingredients and vice versa, creating fusion cuisine that had everyone pleasantly surprised. There was music and dancing, with humans attempting Velaran spiral dances and Velarans gamely trying to understand Earth's concept of the electric slide. There were toasts in multiple languages, and more than one person crying happy tears, including Sarah, who would deny it later. But Ethan's favorite moment came on the second night, when he and Lyrae slipped away from the festivities to visit the young twilight iris sapling. They knelt before it together, and Ethan produced a small container from his pocket. I brought soil from Earth, he said quietly, from my childhood home. And you brought soil from the place where you were born, yes? Leroy nodded, producing her own container. From the mountain forest where my mother taught me to read the trees. Together, they mixed the soils and gently added them around the base of the growing iris. The symbolism wasn't lost on either of them, their two worlds. Literally merged, nourishing something new and beautiful. In 100 years, this will bloom, Leroy said softly. And we'll be here to see it, Ethan said, taking her hand. We'll bring our children, if we're blessed with them. We'll tell them the story of a flower offered in ignorance that became the foundation of everything. Our children, Leroy repeated, wonder in her voice. Human Velaran children, the first of their kind. Proof that love transcends biology and distance and every logical reason why it shouldn't work. He pulled her close, and she rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat, a rhythm that had become as familiar to her as her own. Ethan? I'm glad you didn't know what the twilight iris meant, she said. If you'd known, you might have hesitated, might have second-guessed. Sometimes the best things come from beautiful mistakes. Not a mistake, he corrected, kissing the top of her head. A misunderstanding that led to understanding. To the truest thing I've ever known. Above them, Valora's twin moons and Earth's distant light all shone together, and the young iris swayed in a breeze that carried the scent of two worlds mingling. Around them, the forest hummed with life. Velaran creatures calling in the darkness. Earth crickets Ethan had introduced chirping their responses, creating a chorus that belonged to neither world alone but to the future they were building together. 6 months later, when the Valoran Human Cultural Exchange Center officially opened with Ethan as director and Leroy as head of intercultural studies, they planted a garden of twilight iris saplings around its perimeter. Each one was tended by couples, human Velaran pairs who had followed Ethan and Lyrae's example, finding love across the stars. You started something, Sarah observed, standing with them at the opening ceremony. A whole movement of intercultural bonding. The sociologists are having a field day. We just followed our hearts, Leroy said, her hand resting protectively over her stomach where the first human Valoran child was beginning to grow. The rest of the universe decided to follow along. The universe, Ethan said, wrapping his arm around his wife's shoulders and marveling at the word. Wife, partner, mother of his future child, has excellent taste. That evening, in the home they'd built together on the edge of both the Valoran village and the human research compound, they stood on their balcony watching the sunset. The sky painted itself in shades that existed on both their worlds, amber and violet, gold and silver, proof that beauty needed no translation. Do you ever regret it? Leroy asked quietly, though she knew the answer. Giving up your old life, staying here? Ethan turned her in his arms, tilting her chin up so he could look into her silver eyes. I didn't give up my life. I found it. Every day with you, every challenge we've navigated, every time we've laughed at our cultural misunderstandings or held each other through the hard moments, that's not sacrifice. Leroy, that's grace. Even when I accidentally made your coffee with that Velaran herb that turned your tongue purple for a week, especially then, he said, laughing. Though maybe we should label things more clearly in the kitchen. She kissed him then, soft and sweet, and whispered against his lips, I love you across galaxies, Ethan Cross, and I love you beyond stars, Lyrae of Valora. He paused, grinning. Lyrae Cross of Valora. Our children are going to have such complicated names, she murmured, but she was smiling, her bioluminescent hair glowing with contentment. They'll be complicated and beautiful, and proof that the best stories start with misunderstandings and end with forever, Ethan said, and in the garden below their home, the twilight iris they'd planted on their bonding day continued to grow, its roots sinking deep into soil that held both worlds, reaching toward a bloom that would take decades, but would last for generations, just like the love that had started with a flower, offered in innocence and grown into something that would echo across the stars for all time.